In the autumn of 1152, Henry of Sandomierz left Poland and began the long journey toward Jerusalem. The journey alone would take nearly 5 months. Traveling south through Hungary and Byzantium, Henry crossed the same routes used by pilgrims, crusaders, merchants, and nobles moving between Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Eventually, the road brought him to Constantinople, then onward to the ports of the Levant, and finally, to the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself. For a young Polish prince, the Holy Land must have felt like another world. Jerusalem stood at the center of medieval Christianity, a city sacred to millions, but constantly threatened by war. According to medieval accounts, Henry visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of the most sacred places in the Christian world. Soon afterwards, he joined the forces of King Baldwin III as the Kingdom of Jerusalem prepared for war. The Siege of Ascalon. For decades, Ascalon had remained one of the strongest Muslim fortresses on the southern frontier of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Its massive walls blocked Christian control of the coast and threatened the security of the Crusader states. By 1153, King Baldwin was determined to destroy it. Henry now found himself at the center of this conflict. The campaign that followed would become one of the defining victories of the Crusader world. And what Henry witnessed there may have changed him forever. This was not a small border skirmish. This was one of the largest military operations of the 12th century. Knights from across Europe gathered beneath the walls of Ascalon. Massive siege engines battered the city's fortifications. The military orders fought at the front lines. During one assault, the Grand Master of the Templars, Bernard de Tremolay, was killed in the fighting. Soon after the city finally fell in August 1153, another legendary figure rose to replace him, André de Montbard, one of the original founders of the Templar order and a close relative of Bernard of Clairvaux himself. For Henry, the world he had imagined since childhood was no longer an idea. It stood before him in the armies, military orders, and frontier fortresses of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Here were the warrior monks Bernard had written about. Here was the frontier kingdom defending itself against overwhelming enemies. Here was proof that discipline, faith, and military organization could hold back forces far larger than themselves. And Henry was standing in the middle of it. He was not an anonymous traveler passing through Jerusalem unnoticed. He was a prince moving within the world of Crusader elites, military orders, and royal courts. He saw how the Templars fought. He saw the Hospitallers defend the frontier. He saw an entire kingdom organized around the challenge of survival. And perhaps somewhere beneath the walls of Ascalon, Henry began imagining how such a world could one day exist in Poland itself. When Henry returned to Poland around 1154, he returned to a country facing many of the same problems he had witnessed in the Holy Land. The enemies were different. The landscape was different. But the challenge was remarkably similar. The Kingdom of Jerusalem stood on the frontier between Christendom and the Muslim world. Poland stood on the frontier between Christian Europe and the pagan tribes beyond its borders. Prussian and Jotvingian raids remained a constant threat. Settlements were attacked and burned. Trade routes became dangerous. Entire communities lived under the constant fear of sudden violence arriving from the forests. Most rulers would have seen only a military problem. Henry saw something more. He had spent a year watching how the Crusader states survived on a hostile frontier. Victory at Ascalon had not been achieved by courage alone. It had required organization, military orders, religious institutions, fortified centers, a kingdom built around the defense of a frontier. And now Henry began introducing elements of that model into his own lands. One of his most important decisions was to bring the Hospitallers to Poland. After returning from the Holy Land, Henry granted the order estates and privileges in Zagość near Sandomierz, creating what became the first Hospitaller foundation in Poland. This was far more than a religious donation. The Hospitallers represented experience, organization, and a direct connection to the world Henry had encountered in Jerusalem. According to the later chronicle of Jan Długosz, Henry also returned from the Holy Land accompanied by Templar knights. In the years that followed, the order established commanderies across Poland, and later traditions would link them to Opatów as well. At the same time, Henry became associated with ambitious religious foundations across his domain. Among them was the great Collegiate church at Opatów. Standing at one of the most important crossroads in medieval Poland, the church was a remarkable undertaking for its age. Its scale still surprises visitors today. And for generations, people wondered why such an ambitious project had been built here. Centuries later, Jan Długosz described two knightly figures standing near the entrance of the church, carrying shields marked with distinctive crosses. Although the statues themselves have long since disappeared, people continued to remember a connection between Opatów, Henry of Sandomierz, and the military orders of the Holy Land. Perhaps because Henry's journey to Jerusalem had left a deeper mark on these lands than anyone realized. He had not returned carrying treasure. He had returned with a vision shaped beneath the walls of Ascalon, a vision of how a kingdom on the frontier could defend itself and endure. And for the next 12 years, he devoted himself to turning that vision into reality. But Henry's vision of a Christian frontier would eventually be put to the test, just as it had been in the Holy Land. Through war, the threat from the Prussian tribes never disappeared, and year after year raids continued across the frontier. And just as Henry had once ridden beneath the walls of Ascalon, he now found himself fighting on the frontier of his own homeland. In 1166, another major campaign was launched against the Prussians. The Piast princes had fought these pagan tribes before, and often succeeded in driving them back. This time, however, the enemy relied on deception. By pretending to cooperate, they lured the Polish army deeper into unfamiliar territory. The trap worked. Step by step, the Polish forces were drawn deeper into forests and marshlands, where their greatest advantage, heavily armored cavalry, became a weakness. Visibility vanished among the trees. The silence was deceptive. Then the attack came. Prussian warriors struck from the surrounding forests, catching the Polish army in ground where horses could barely move and formations quickly dissolved. In the chaos that followed, Henry fought to cover the withdrawal of his men. And there, amid the marshes and forests of the Prussian frontier, Henry of Sandomierz was killed alongside many of his knights. Years earlier, he had traveled to Jerusalem in search of the ideals he admired as a boy. Now, on the frontier of his own homeland, he died defending them. Perhaps that is why, centuries later, his memory still lingers across these lands. Henry of Sandomierz died in 1166. But the frontier wars did not end with him. Over the centuries that followed, Poland would face Mongol invasions, Tatar raids, and the advance of the Ottoman Empire. Again and again, the frontier would be tested. And perhaps that is the true legacy of Henry of Sandomierz. Not simply that he fought in Jerusalem, but that he returned home believing Poland itself stood on the frontier of Christendom. Yet the story does not end with Henry's death. It continues in the places he left behind. That is why we traveled to Sandomierz and Opatów to follow the traces of his legacy. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.